Welcome to the Lead Clinic podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Peter Vitale, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Paul Love with Verse.ai. Paul, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Of course, of course. So, Paul, at a very high level, just tell me a little bit about what Verse is and what Verse does, and how you're helping insurance agents and other folks who are buying leads and trying to reach out to their prospective consumers.
Sure. Verse is many things, but at a high level, we're a conversational texting platform, and it's an AI-based platform with a human assist. So we are generally in the business of helping our customers, which many are insurance agents and others, to engage and follow up with their leads, but also to have other conversations at other points in the sales funnel. We do this, like I said, in a hybrid manner where generally we're engaging leads immediately if they're live leads, and we're following a script to qualify the leads in most cases. And then when we find a qualified lead, we're going to reconnect that lead with our customer, either through setting an appointment, maybe it's just updating their CRM and they have workflows from that point forward, or we might drive an inbound call to their team or to their call center. And that's at a high level what we're doing.
And so one of the things you said, and one of the things that I like most about Verse, is that there is a human element in addition to AI. And I'll say this, when I first met you, it was not the AI craze like there is today, right? It was before really the public release of ChatGPT, which really drove an AI conversation in this country. And AI became kind of the new hot button thing to say, right? You're not new to AI, like so many people are, but there's a human element to Verse, and that's what I like. And I guess, why is there also a human element, and how do you feel that benefits your customers?
Right. There's a lot of reasons. We have been using AI for a long time. As you said, so many people just weren't aware that there were models that could be leveraged. We didn't create all of our AI. It's not all proprietary. It never has been. And of course, these days it gets even better as we integrate OpenAI and some of the AI systems that people have become familiar with recently. We still believe that there's a place for human beings to create authentic conversations. When we're engaged in conversation via text with leads per se, or consumers, it helps when they think they're speaking with a human. Yeah. And because we have humans in play, even though they're not in play that often, we can back it up. And when we need that level of cognitive capability that only a human can bring to the table, we have it and we're there to do that. And therefore we can structure the entire conversations that we have to kind of have the assumption in play that it is a human conversation. We don't lie about it or mislead consumers saying, that it's all AI or all human. And the other thing is, one thing that people never think about, because text is so strong, but when you start texting people, and this happens to everybody, outside of business as well, there are times when you're like, I don't want to text anymore. I want to talk. And you just call. And that happens. So we engage leads via text. Sometimes they're polite and they say, would it be okay if, could you call me instead? And we will. Sure. But sometimes they don't ask. They just dial the exact same number. And because we have humans on our team, we pick up the phone and finish the conversation on the phone in most cases. Sometimes when that happens, our customers want us to route that call immediately to their team. Yeah, sure. We're very flexible in terms of how we can do all that. And there are certain things still in the conversations that we have, some of the ones that are more complicated, there are certain elements of it that we believe that humans can still do more effectively. In spite of the fact that obviously there's a cost associated with that. So looking at it from the perspective of an insurance agent buying leads, because that's probably the vast majority of our customers or what they do, insurance agents who are buying leads, what would be, I'm trying to think of an example of is it just something that a human may say in a way in which AI doesn't understand, or what would trigger a human to be engaged? Well, there's a couple things that can do that. Sometimes people respond by writing a book.
Yeah.
Okay,
Me,
like
usually, yes.
Are you currently insured? We're hoping it's Boolean and it's kind of a yes or no question, but sometimes somebody might say, well, I was, but I had this horrible accident and now, my wife is sick and she's in the hospital, and they might,
Because
literally
she's
write
sick and in the hospital, I forgot to pay the bill.
many
the policy.
paragraphs.
Yeah, sure.
And it's going to confuse the AI, right? The AI is not going to have a high level of confidence, the same level. A human can read all of that and immediately get the gist of it and figure out what's relevant for where we're trying to go with the conversation. And maybe AI will get to that point at some point, but that's one of the examples is where there's verbose responses that will throw the AI off. And it's really, Verse's promise to our customers is that it's never going to be perfect, but it's a very high probability that the conversations won't go off the rails, right? Because we're good enough at recognizing when the AI is not going to handle it perfectly, to make sure that a human mind is looking at that conversation at the same time. So that's one example. Other ones are kind of questions that have like numeric intents, right? When you ask somebody what's their electricity bill or what's their credit score, those are often also situations where they might throw out several numbers, even though it may not be a long response.
Yeah.
My credit score was 630, but fortunately it went up to 650 last week. What do you do, right? If AI is getting a lot better. Obviously, we're every month that goes by, the number of situations that we would pass to a human being to look at is obviously decreasing, right? We're able to handle more and more with AI, but those are some of the situations that can cause it. We try and structure conversations to solicit Boolean responses.
That makes sense.
But we have customers who when you think about what you're asking or what these conversations look like, there's really two kinds of questions. There's questions that are qualifying questions, and therefore, depending on how somebody answers, we're either done or we're not, right? And then there's questions that are information gathering, where additional information is helpful to the business as they go about the next part, further down the funnel, right? The next step in the funnel. With the open-ended questions that are information gathering, we don't really care what they say, and it doesn't matter if we can interpret it accurately, right?
Got it.
It's the qualifying questions that determine whether or not we're going to continue with this lead or disqualify them and move them out of the way. That's where it's critical that we, do it right.
And so, like, when I look at it from an insurance agent's perspective, like, you could ask qualifying questions that maybe the person even filled out on the lead form, but maybe we want to ask a follow-up question to that. So, like, are you currently insured? And then we could ask a question and we could program Verse to say, have you been currently insured for the past 6 months or year or things like that? And that could go down the funnel, and you could disqualify, instead of disqualifying it with a human expense in a particular insurance agency, you could disqualify a lead essentially in an automated fashion.
Oh yeah,
right away.
I mean, the bulk of what we do these days is driven by the AI, right? So most of the qualification or disqualification is getting handled by the AI without the need for human involvement in the conversation. But also what you're saying about, somebody's filled out a lead form or maybe been through a questionnaire on a website and filled out, answered some questions. In many cases, our customers ask us to ask them again. Sometimes it's additional questions, like you're saying, but there's just a lot of, people are lazy or they're in a hurry. Like there's many cases where there's just not a lot of faith that what they put into those forms on the website is real or accurate, and that, if we can get away with
people move quick.
Ask it again if it's critical.
Yeah. And there might be a lead publisher may put a default value or pre-select, an option, and someone just keeps clicking next through the form. I mean, I've seen a lot of crazy things, but, when I look at the value of Verse, right, people text message and respond to text message probably more so than any other method of communication, right? I think that as I get older, right, I become one of the few people who answers the phone frequently, talks to people. Like, I prefer texting, no doubt, over a conversation most of the time. But I think certainly people who are younger than me, even at a much higher rate than I am, are not answering the phone. But people are responding to text messages. So Versus value proposition to my mind is like we're communicating with people in the most effective way possible, which is through text. We don't have to have humans or, an insurance agent's humans, reviewing and responding to these, but really driving those as an inbound call back into an agency. So my question really is, are you seeing answer rates decline, improve? I mean, I feel like marketers are always pushing the envelope, right? And as we send more text messages, is text going to turn into the next email where people just kind of completely shut it off? Or are people really still responding at really high levels to text messages, in your opinion?
Oh, we still see them responding at really high levels, but I wonder about the same thing.
Yeah.
Like in theory, that channel should eventually get saturated and be way harder to penetrate.
Yeah.
But one thing about it that's so different, although some companies have managed to get branded calls and, when a call comes in, it's not unknown who's calling you. But the reason that I think it takes so much longer before text would get to that point is that it's transparent. First of all, you know exactly who's talking to you. And not only, do you know the brand's name, but you know why. You can see what this communication is about, which is really hard to do still on the phone for most people. We're still seeing kind of the same amazing, response rates in the texting channel as we do. And I mean, there's more to do there too. We're starting to experiment with MMS messaging, which is, another way to potentially increase.
Like photo messages or?
Yeah, just kind of could be photos, not video yet, but just beyond a text.
What would like a use case, like what would be an example of an MMS like in any context, not just specific to insurance?
Part of it is just, going back to what you said, creating something that's differentiated. Like texting is transparent and it's very effective, and 98% of the messages are read. Those are averages, right? I mean,
sure. In
a situation where for whatever reason we believe that maybe some visual would give us even more probability of getting a response. It's new. Like I don't really have great answers. I know we just did a Black Friday campaign with one of our customers with MMS. Apparently it was successful. I don't know all the details, but and I know there's some other players out there in the kind of text engagement space that use that.
Yeah, no, it's right. It's always doing something differently is always fascinating to me. And I don't know. If I saw a picture come through, I think I'm more likely to look at it than not look at it.
Rich content.
Exactly.
Right? I mean, that's always been true that rich content is interesting.
Yeah.
So, a couple words of text isn't that interesting, relatively speaking.
Sure.
I mean, fortunately, it works really well anyway. I think as the space evolves, there'll be more variation in what a text could look like.
So one of the things that I noticed, and we used Verse at my insurance agency, and that was really kind of the pilot that brought us to use it into offering this as a service, an add-on service to lead clinic clients. And as some of our clients may know who use it, right, there is Verse is going to want to work with a client that's spending X number of dollars per month or per year. And, we allow our clients who may be smaller than your, target client to use your service through a sub account with us. And when we used Verse internally, we saw that, it was really interesting to me. I called it one of the strangest examples of human behavior ever, where someone did not respond to a message for literally 6 weeks. And Verse very politely just kept a very polite outreach, right? It was not aggressive. It was not overbearing. It was not every day. It was not every hour. I think I literally mapped it out on a calendar. In one instance, it wasn't even one message a week. There was a week there was no messages sent. And then in the strangest example of human behavior, someone just responded, "Yes, I'm ready. Call me." And so to me, I'm the kind of person who generally reads my text messages as they come in or a few hours later at most if I'm in meetings or something. But this was an example where I said no human would ever continue to outreach at that level. It just wasn't going to happen. I see it at the fringes, right? I see people respond right away, and then I see people respond 5 weeks later, just kind of crazy, and not as much in the middle, but more on the fringes of timeline. And I think that's the benefit, right, of what you guys are doing. that no one's going to follow up. But do you think that's the same? Like, I mean, I know you guys work in a lot of different verticals, not just insurance. You guys started what, in real estate? Do you think this holds true? Is this just kind of how humans behave? Some people just don't read text messages or just reply at the right time?
Oh, sure. I think, and it's not just either in the beginning or the end, right? Everything in between. Typically, the curve looks as you'd expect, like heavy in the first day, a little bit less the next day, and gradually declining to a long tail. And it depends on if it's live leads. That's what it looks like. If the leads are aged, that long tail is a lot more powerful. It has to do with sales cycle, right? If you think you're buying solar panels today, I've been through this myself. Tomorrow, actually, Monday, I'm getting solar panels installed.
All right.
You know how long I've been thinking about it? Like how long ago was the first time I submitted a lead or made an inquiry?
Yeah.
Well, it was too expensive, or then NEM 3.0, and I was like, oh God, I got to get the contract done by April. Like same thing with buying a home, getting a mortgage, getting a HELOC, whatever it is. Like these are, everybody wishes they would decide to make the decision and buy the thing today, but it's just not how it happens. Historically, if you look at who Verse serves, and this is changing today, but there's three things that were fundamentally had to be true in terms of like who does Verse work well for. One is, are the leads expensive? Two, is the value of a new deal high? And three, do two humans have to speak for the deal to close, right? So it's not e-commerce. It's not, somebody selling a widget for $20. These are transactions that are worth a lot of money, and companies invest a lot of money in the funnel to create the marketing opportunities. That's why we see we do see the performance over time, and every industry and every company and every lead source. I mean, there's differences in what that curve looks like. But it is amazing that people will wake up 6 months later. We usually don't nurture anything longer than 6 months. These days, often it's quite a bit shorter than that. But you're right. It's what you'd expect. It starts out aggressive. Our cadences start out aggressive. They diminish over time in terms of the frequency. Text is powerful because text represents control for the consumer. And even if you don't do it that well, it works because the consumer is in control. And that's what people want. Whether it's a long string of text messages that are pretty aggressive, or whether it's, we have lots of customers who ask us to back off and be more conservative. It doesn't really matter, because what we're trying to do is give the consumer the control over the dialogue. When they're ready, they'll be there. And sometimes people erase all the messages, and so that message that arrives on the 6th month, it's not like they can see the stream of messages that occurred before it. Sometimes they do. I never erase anything. Right? So
same.
The whole thread would be on my phone when I finally woke up 6 months later. but so sometimes it could appear to come out of context, right? If we haven't texted anybody in 2 weeks and they've erased everything, it'd be kind of like, who are you? Who is this? Versus somebody who's got the whole thread.
There.
They've just been kind of ignoring for whatever reason for so long, and then it's time where they want to engage.
Well, and I mean, like the benefit to text in my mind in like a typical insurance agency isn't open 24/7, 365. But if someone responds at 9 o'clock at night, you guys can politely text, office isn't open, when's a better time, and really try and schedule that follow-up call. And I think that's really the benefit that we've seen with the agencies that we work with, that work with Verse, is we talk a lot about meeting the consumer where they want to be met. And I think that having an option that's available that allows the consumer, like you said, to be in control, but also to have a response come through, and have that response be accurate without having an agency employee having to sit in front of a computer or phone to do it.
For sure. We see something like 30% of all leads come in after hours or weekends.
Really? Okay.
In most cases, our performance we can deliver on the leads that come in after hours versus the one during the day is very similar. There's some cases where there's a fall off for nighttime and weekends, but most of the time we do just as well with those leads that come in at 10 p.m. or 2 a.m. or whenever it is. If you're filling out a lead form at 2 a.m., you're awake and you're engaged. And you may not want to talk to somebody at 2 a.m., but you want to go through that first part of the conversation to get it set up. So we're there. And if that's when they want to have the first part of the conversation to schedule an appointment, or obviously if we're trying to connect them to a call center that's not open at 2 a.m., we're going to put off the last piece of the conversation until the next day. But you've captured their interest and you've started a conversation, and it leads to a high probability that the next day you'll be able to make the connection. And
you guys don't just do prospective consumer outreach, like you do customer service outreach as well, potentially. Like it can be any particular use case for getting in touch with another human. It doesn't have to be just buy leads, reach out to them. What are some of the other use cases that are really prevalent in your business?
Reviews are a good one. Soliciting reviews, reputation management. As you know, we've done a few for you. We've done helping you get documents signed, helping you get payment collection.
Yep.
It really could be anything. Verse, one of the differentiators and what makes Verse so exciting and interesting, especially for my role in the company, is it's flexible enough and powerful enough that what I generally say is, if you have a conversation and you can write it down on a piece of paper, I don't care if it's short or long or simple or complex, and it has high value and it requires a conversational capability, it's not just a blast, and it makes sense to have that conversation via text, we can do it. Obviously, if that conversation has high value to the company, then whatever we need to charge for that conversation, it should pencil out. So we're excited about the evolution of all of that in the future. I mean, historically, we were really just doing lead engagement, and then we started testing other use cases over time, and we've been successful with many of them, but there's so much more we could do there. And, there's tons of competition, right? We also have to be careful and look at all the different kind of niches within the world of conversational texting and make sure that we continue to leverage the assets that we have that make us strong in what we do relative to other competitors and other use cases. But there's no doubt that it works. It can work for anything from a cost perspective. If it's a high value conversation, it's likely that we can do it really well and be a successful campaign for both sides.
One of the interesting parts about, kind of the timing of us recording this and, and these podcasts will be like released, in stages over the next few months. But, I'm recording this, at a time where the Federal Communications Commission has, issued a second proposed notice of rulemaking on lead gen. But, not really speaking specific to that, but speaking to the FCC and there is a robocall crisis in this country. There is a, text messaging is not as bad, but there is, text messages coming from bad actors that are sending malicious links and stuff like that. How does Verse work with carriers to make sure the messages you guys are sending on behalf of your clients are getting delivered to the user's phone? As our viewers may or may not know, that's not always the case, right? Carriers can just block messages from coming through, right?
Right. And this wasn't something anybody talked about a year ago.
Right.
Right. Like this year, I legitimately feel like a quarter of our value proposition is deliverability and compliance, but really deliverability is harder than compliance.
Really?
Well, compliance, you just have to follow the law and understand the rules. I mean,
Makes
it
sense.
may have good or bad impacts on what you're doing and the performance of the campaigns, but deliverability is more complicated to solve for. And nobody was ever talking about it. Big brands were building their own texting campaigns and being successful and getting the messages through. And today we have big brands you can't even imagine. I'm talking about Fortune 500 companies calling Verse and saying, let's talk about what you guys do because we're having deliverability problems. They have the resources, but so the point is, we have invested a lot in learning how to make sure that we can deliver very high rates of deliverability. It's not always perfect. It's a combination of many things. It's a combination of technology. It's a combination of relationships. So we have an entire carrier relationship team, at Verse. We have a compliance team. We have a deliverability team. These people we know people at Twilio. We know people at the carriers. When there is a problem, we have connections and people to talk to. I don't understand all of it, but the reality is these algorithms that block texts were not really designed for conversational texting.
Yeah.
I understand that there's many, many times where a message that we've sent on behalf of one of our customers might be blocked, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with what we're doing. Nobody would ever claim that, that's a problem, and we'll end up talking to our counterparts, whatever the agency is, and show them what we're doing and that, what's wrong with this. And they're like, oh, there's nothing wrong. And, it gets corrected. And over time, the algorithms get smarter to be able to accommodate the types of conversations that we're having. I think, that'll benefit the whole industry.
Certainly.
But it's technology, it's monitoring, it's being aware. We know that many customers have no clue that their messages are being blocked.
Exactly. That's huge. Most people would send a message and they just assume it went through without even thinking otherwise. They have no indication to believe that message wouldn't have been sent. And the FCC has basically told the carriers that you don't have to tell people you're blocking the message. You can just block the message.
Yeah, and think about some of the scenarios I think about. Let's say that 10% of your messages are being blocked. You may never really come to realize that because maybe your business is seasonal and you're headed into the period of the year where performance is 10% less anyway. Mm-hmm. Unless it just falls off the cliff and it really has you scratching your head going, nothing else has changed. What variable could be causing this?
Yeah.
A reduction in 50% in conversions. That might make somebody start thinking, I wonder if our messages are getting delivered. Mm-hmm. But when it's not a huge impact, it's probably invisible to so many companies because there's many things that could, cause their performance to rise and fall. And this is just one more. But if it's not a huge number, people may just assume it's other factors.
I would agree with that. And I think that most people watching this are probably completely unaware that their messages can even be blocked. Like that's a thing. I mean, we're starting to see people be more aware of it, like you said, within probably the past 12 months. I certainly would have never anticipated it before. And I think that that's always the benefit of working with a specialist, right? You guys are specialists at this. You know exactly what you're doing. You know how to do it. You have those teams in place. You have those relationships that would be nearly impossible for the average insurance agent, the average solar panel installation company, the average realtor to make sure that they get through. So, in my mind, the value proposition of using a company like Verse is not only, your core value, but this I wouldn't even call it an ancillary value, but this really additional value, making sure that the messages are being delivered. And you guys have teams that show you, and I know we've talked about this a few months ago, if there's a deliverability issue going on, unlike if I was just sending text through Twilio or whoever.
We know instantly, mm-hmm. and we can see it develop. Sometimes there's minor disturbances and they're fine, right? They're so small, they're not really killing the metrics on any campaign, but you can see how I've been involved in some use cases with deliverability issues where you can see how it starts over here, and then it spreads,
mm-hmm.
Because we provision lots of numbers for our larger customers, and for whatever, and we do all kinds of variation, and we do a lot to make sure that it doesn't look like we're doing massive, blasting, right?
Yeah.
Even for our larger customers, we might be doing thousands of messages a day. Not all of those messages have the same text, right? The same verbiage, and it's mainly the initial message. Mm-hmm. So we run many variations, all effectively saying the same thing, but it with slight tweaks, different words, partially for that reason to help with deliverability. But you can see where, let's say there's 6 of those variants, one of them gets flagged, and there's 20 numbers that are provisioned that happen to get that message. The other ones are fine, right? And we see that, and we literally can make the connection that variant is a problem. Get rid of it,
mm-hmm.
Right away. And,
these are
it's that type of detail that we can kind of see, and that level of operational efficiency that we can bring to the table to catch problems early and address them and fix them immediately before they spread, more deeply across the suite of numbers that we've provisioned for a customer.
And so let's talk about this for a second. You guys started in the real estate vertical. Today you work in many, many, many different industries. Just give us a few besides insurance, besides real estate. What other kinds of companies do you work with?
Sure. It's true. For 5 years, we were in real estate only because we've been around for almost 11 years.
Okay.
Today, we're in real estate, mortgage, education, home services, solar, insurance, finance, and other things too. Another thing that excites me about Verse is that it's universal. Mm-hmm. There are probably 30 industries that you could define where we have an equal probability of being strong. We just haven't had enough time to go to all of them yet.
Sure.
And I mean, admittedly, there will be some that would be harder to penetrate because time has elapsed and there's more competition. But what we do is a very universal solution that could apply. And we have lots of one-off customers. Like we have a joint pain institute, right? Mm-hmm. We have a little bit in healthcare. We have just customers that come out of the weeds. We do some legal tort. So yeah, there's certainly been a focus. It's based on how we built the company. We've tried to get a critical mass of knowledge so we can sound like we know what we're talking about as we pursue a particular industry and make a concerted effort to make an initial penetration and then build on that if it's successful. That's how we generally approached it over the last 5 years. But now it's less of that. Now we are absolutely confident that it could pretty much work for anything. One of our challenges moving forward is how do we position the company to attract all of those things that we could serve well, instead of just selling into 6 or 7 or 10 industries.
And insurance is one of the industries that you guys are looking to grow in. And, we've talked about that before. And, from my perspective, it seems like it's the perfect industry to grow in because, at least on the customer acquisition side, there's a lot of insurance. Like insurance leads are like one of, probably by volume, the highest amount of leads, in the ecosystem today because let's face it, everyone needs auto insurance. Right? The government mandates it. I don't know. I would assume like 90% of Americans have a mortgage on their home and, they're under a contract with their mortgage to keep insurance on it. So it's a product that everyone needs one way or another. And so everyone is frequently looking, especially in today's insurance economy, right, where rates have gone up and up and up. And I know we talked about that a few weeks ago with your own personal insurance, right? Rates are going up and up and up. People are shopping. And so there is a high amount of shoppers in the market. This is an efficient way for insurance agencies to get somebody on the phone. And so I guess walk us through and just tell us even, a little bit about Call Connect or Contact Connect service and kind of what that means and what a flow would look like to get an inbound call through.
Right. And I can also explain kind of how it evolved and why all of a sudden we can help insurance agents. Because like I said earlier, there were 3 fundamental things that had to be true. One is the leads had to be expensive and the value of the service being sold had to be expensive. And I'm talking about, a home, a mortgage, solar panels, a new pool or whatever it is. These are talking about a lot of money. Like that's insurance is generally a lot less expensive and the leads are a lot less expensive.
Leads are tremendously less expensive than those other verticals. Yeah.
So we had a cost structure that, over time, the percentage of activity that's been handled by human beings in the conversations that we hold on behalf of our customers has declined, right? So 3 years ago, everything we did was in theory more expensive because there was more human involvement.
Got it.
So over time, we've evolved to the point where we can kind of throttle the level of human assets involved in a conversation. And also, just generally speaking, the AI has gotten so much better that the costs have gone down. And that's why we intentionally more or less ignored insurance as a vertical for many years. But then as we got to the point where we could serve it and be cost effective, then we started pursuing it. And as you well know, it works because, with auto insurance, these are not very expensive leads and the value of a new policy is not that high relative to some of these other things we're talking about. So Call Connect is really the use case. We call it Call Connect that in most cases will be a low-cost engagement, a low-cost conversation style that'll work for a situation like this. And it is very simply just engaging the consumer via text because text gets through the noise and text is transparent and it works. But the intent of the conversation is to drive an inbound phone call to a team, a call center or a sales team. And that is inexpensive. That piece of it can be automated. We're doing an IVR style transfer. We're not doing a warm transfer that requires human beings to get somebody on the phone and get the other side on the phone.
And so an IRV transfer, just for folks who might not be familiar, just explain that real quick.
Yeah, that's a transfer where we're just imagine a conversation where we're saying, reaching out to you to following up on your inquiry about auto insurance. Is this a good time to speak with a licensed agent? And if they say yes, then we say, great, we're going to call you. So we call from the same number we just texted. They pick up the phone and they hear us say, this is Alex from Encore Insurance. Press 1 to be connected with a licensed agent now.
Got it.
They press 1, we dial into whatever number we've been configured to dial, and you pick up the phone and you're on your way. Right? So that's short and sweet. Like the example I just gave. It's not always that easy. We can add qualification questions into the flow so that if you don't want us to transfer a call to your business until we've established that lead is qualified in some way or not, we can certainly, the longer the conversation is, the more cost there is, because the minute you start asking questions, it takes more resources, even if it's just telecommunication resources. But the minute you start asking questions, it increases the probability that at some point in that conversation, a human asset will become involved. But no matter what, those are relatively low cost engagements compared to some of the other ones, where we're reaching out, asking 7 questions, some of which are open ended. That the AI may not be able to interpret easily, and at the end of it, we're going through a laborious appointment setting process.
You're talking about appointments, like sometimes in certain cases, someone coming out to the person's home to like a contractor.
Literally booking an appointment on a digital calendar on behalf of with the consumer and the service provider that we represent.
An actual in-person appointment.
Or virtual. During COVID, there was lots of virtual appointments, and for some businesses, they're all virtual or phone appointments. But yeah, like in home services and solar, at least half of our customers want in person. Yeah. Someone's going to do a renovation to your house or something. They need to see the scope of the project in kind of a meaningful way, I would think. So it's interesting to me because I always just think with like my insurance agent hat on and like, all right, we just want to talk to someone on the phone, want to give them a quote, want to just sell them a policy and move on, right? But you guys can do much more than that, is what you're saying. Like you're literally scheduling to have someone come out to someone else's home to do a full consultation on some. Yeah, so that's fascinating. I mean, there's 2 levels of that because the conversation example I gave you before was really easy. They said yes right away, but usually they say, get back to me at 5:00. I'm at work.
Yeah,
I can't talk to somebody now. And then what we do is we just listen to them and do what they ask, right?
Yeah.
Once again, it's putting the consumer in control. So if they want to push it off till 5:00, we say, great, we'll reach back out at 5, and we do. And then they say, oh, my kid's crying, call me next week. And we say, we will. And we just keep going down the line. We eventually get them when the time is right, when they want to have that conversation. The best time to call is when they want to call.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense, right? I mean, like I talk a lot about respecting consumer choices and doing to someone else what you would want done to you. And, you said earlier, you're empowering the consumer. I think that's a perfect way to position it because it helps brands' reputation for the brands that are using Verse. And it also is it's the logical thing. If you want to win this person's business, you don't want to talk to them when kids crying in the background or when they're at work, right? You want to talk to them at the right time. And I think that's really being able to do that at scale without a tool like Verse is nearly impossible, right?
Oh, not only that. Not only is it impossible, but it's a nightmare for whoever's job that is.
Yeah.
People don't realize it, but I think so many companies tell their sales team to start leveraging the power of text, right? And in some cases, there's systems and everything, but in a lot of cases, they're just like taking their cell phone and starting to text people. Well, if you're going to open up a text conversation, you better be there when the person responds.
Yeah.
But you're not, because how can you be? You've got a life and a family, and you're putting your kids to bed, and you're eating dinner, and you're at a movie. If that's when people get back to you and you're silent, that's not good. Right? You could be doing more harm than good.
Absolutely.
For this type of thing to really work well, we don't care how unresponsive somebody is, but our promise to our customers is when somebody finally engages, we're there and we're awake 24/7, and we will respond immediately, right? And we'll respect the fact that they're ready now, and this is the time to continue the conversation.
And so, like going into some of the other use cases, because I think this is very interesting. Like we did this with in the insurance world of clients who hadn't paid their bill, right? And, just gently reaching out to them to, say, hey, we're just reaching out to you to see, what's going on. Let us know, give us a call. But having that ability for these, insurance requires a lot of touch points, right? Renewals, missed payments, claims. It's a human-to-human business, no doubt. And being able to automate some of that activity, not just in a one-message way. Like I've seen this, where with certain insurance carriers where they'll just send a payment made, payment received, payment, this like just kind of transactional text message, let's say. But this isn't a conversational way. Like, okay, reach out to me on Thursday and I'll make the payment, then versus reaching out on Thursday to transfer that person into the office to make a payment. Or I already made the payment 5 minutes ago online. Thanks for texting me. Being able to have these in conversational ways, there's a lot of different different use cases. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I think members of our audience who are watching and listening should think about different use cases where you have high amounts of human touch points in your agency, and can we automate those through conversational messaging? I think there's probably a lot more that we could do, like even just reaching out a week after a claim's filed. Hey, just checking up on you to make sure everything's going well with your claim. Is there anything that we could do better? Anything you need?
Yeah, surveys, reputation management.
And surveys, right? I mean, that's, you said that towards the beginning of this conversation. I really like thinking about that again when you say that, right? Google reviews is huge for everyone's SEO. It's like there's a huge emphasis on getting quality reviews. How does that work with the clients you're working in? Do you have look, if someone asks me to leave a review, I'm probably going to leave the review. If nobody asks, unless something goes just miserably wrong. Right. I'm not going to just, I don't know, maybe I should. I just by default don't say, oh, that went great, I should leave a review. Maybe I should think that way, but I don't. But if someone asks, you're literally just reaching out and then sending them a link, like right to leave a Google review or whatever?
It depends. We do it many ways. One way is that imagine that the review that the customer wants is they want the consumer to answer 3 questions. Mm-hmm. So we can have the entire conversation on text. Are you willing to provide a review? Yes, great. I got 3 questions. And then we go through the questions, we get all the data and we pass it back to them. So one is that way, just conversationally have collect all the data. 2 is, it's funny, a lot of companies that are interested in reviews, it depends on who they are. Actually, not so much with direct brands, but with marketplaces, like an Angie or a Place for Mom. Mm-hmm. When you think about reviews from their perspective, a lot of times they want to drive somebody onto the phone because they believe they'll be able to get multiple reviews out of one phone call. Okay. So sometimes it's about call connect, right? Mm-hmm. Just see if the consumer's okay with providing a review, and if so, connect them to a human being whose job is to be intake on reviews and maximize the number of reviews. And it could be anything in between as well. We could just provide a link, but that's not conversational per se. Sure. I mean, we can kind of be after them with a cadence over time.
Or ask how the experience was. And if it was great, then, perhaps engage them to do a Google review. But
the power of Verse, and the same thing is true for appointments, you can get through a conversation and ask a consumer 3 or 4 questions to be sure they're qualified. And now you want to set an appointment as the next step. You could just say, here's a link, go ahead, right? I mean, you could make the argument that that's ideal because that's putting the consumer in control. But the reality is when you do that, guess what? People don't do it. And so what we do in that situation is, we could just leave the link and hope for the best. We proactively make the appointment.
Got it.
We go back and forth. Is Tuesday good? No. Whatever it takes, however many back and forths it takes to arrive at a time that the consumer feels good about. There's no more powerful way to maximize the number of qualified leads that get to that last stage, which is setting the appointment. Or in the case of a review, if we can keep control of the conversation since they're engaged and get the review in the conversation or transfer to a human being who's talking to them right now, that's always going to be way better than hoping somebody clicks on a link to complete a job or a process, right? So we can do it. I mean, and there are use cases where the best thing to do is provide a link, and we have those. Sometimes, like somebody who's dropped off halfway through an application, right? All you can really do is try and encourage them to click the link and go back in, right? Yeah. So it just depends.
We talked a little bit about, folks filling or folks, coming in late into a conversation, polite messages, bam, they're there. We also find, or at least in my experience, consumers can opt out of text messaging very easily. Now, I have 2 ways to approach that in my brain. Great, let's get them out early. We're not wasting any human resources. Trying to track down this person who doesn't want to talk to us. But some of my thought is maybe that person just didn't want to text, or maybe the text came in at a bad time, or maybe they were in a bad mood and they opted out early. How do you see opt-out rates? Are they increasing as people get more marketing text messages? Have they been pretty steady over time? What are your thoughts on it generally?
Yeah, there's a lot to say about that. I don't think we're seeing much of an increase in opt-out rates. Of course, it's all over the place, right? It depends on the quality of the leads. It depends on what the campaign is. We monitor that. It's one of the early indicators we look at to get a sense for the quality of leads. And it's funny because we haven't had opt-out language in our text conversations forever, right? I mean, it's I don't know, I feel like maybe it's 3 years ago we were kind of started making sure it was in every single message. And in the beginning we were freaking out going, oh my God, everybody's just going to opt out. And you know, a lot of people do, relatively speaking, but then you start looking at the performance, you know, what really happened at the end of the funnel, like, you know, maybe they made just as many sales anyway. So it indicated that if they're opting out, you weren't going to get anywhere with them anyway. Now, that's not always true. I mean, there is a legitimate concern that it's a low friction way to opt out. And, you know, we talk to customers all the time or prospects who are concerned that there's too little friction and they're going to see more opt-outs than would occur in a different channel, or, you know, primarily via phone. You know, net, I think the positives end up outweighing the negatives every single time. And the other thing about it, every company is different in terms of their risk tolerance, but when somebody does opt out of texting, when Verse is texting with them on behalf of one of our customers, they haven't opted out of taking phone calls. They haven't opted out of receiving a text manually. So some companies will say, well, if they opt out anywhere, I'm going to leave them alone everywhere. Yeah. Other companies will just only stop communicating, you know, where they need to legally. And I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know all the nuances,
Sure.
but I mean, it's not black and white. You know, it's not all or nothing.
It certainly isn't.
When there's an opt-out. You know, opt-out rates aren't as high as probably a lot of people think.
I agree.
On quality campaigns, brand has a lot to do with it. When you're running a campaign for a Lowe's or a you know, Fairway Mortgage, you know, or Lennar Homes, those brands have a lot of horsepower, and opt-out rates are going to be lower. When you're, you know, Johnny's Windows, and nobody knows who you are. It's different. So it depends. And I mean, the future of this industry and this business and our business, we've made an intentional decision to you know, every year to work close, to spend more resources building platforms to serve legitimate brands, mid-tier to enterprise companies, who appreciate all the technology we bring to the table, all the horsepower, everything, right? All the flexibility, all the trackability, all the attribution capability. So many of our customers over the years just kind of leverage Verse in a fairly simplistic way, you know, just kind of text our leads, get a hold of them, pass them to us. But the larger, more sophisticated customers, they're passing us tons of attribution data that flows all the way through everything we do, so that they're getting early indicators on campaign performance. Because if in a long sales cycle, like setting an appointment or a call transfer rate is a really great early indicator of what's going to happen 3 months down the line if it's a 90-day sales cycle. And so they can make decisions faster about which campaigns are working, you know, down to the creative, right? I mean, they can pass us attribution parameters that are as granular as they want, and then on our dashboard they can slice and dice all the data. And, you know, for what we can see on our side of the fence, they can get early results. And these days we obviously take in the full funnel metrics as well and make that available on the dashboard, so they can see full funnel metrics within our world.
Yeah, the reporting that you guys have in your platform is phenomenal, and I think that, you know, anyone who uses it would agree, because it breaks out, you know, it can break down by lead source, lead type, you know, campaign type, and really exactly what's the opt-out rate, who do we get in contact with, how many calls did we transfer, you know, and, you know, we've talked about being able to pass full funnel metrics back and to show which ones, you know, closed, which ones were just quoted, and really being able to see all the data in one place, which is really beneficial. One of the things that I like most about your platform is we can see every message, we can see every interaction, and we can rate those interactions. So tell us just a little bit about, you know, what the rating actually does. Like, it's like kind of a 1 through 5 star situation,
right?
You know, and how do you guys use that input to get better? And, you know, are your customers generally reviewing and putting it out there? Should they? Does that make you guys better?
Yes, absolutely. It's a great feature. It's not used a ton. It tends to be used in the beginning. Like, what we do is kind of magical in the beginning, right? And they're very curious, you know, what are you saying to these people and how are these conversations going? So when we have a customer that's new, a lot of times they'll go into the dashboard and they'll look at conversations, and they'll find that, in most cases they're very impressed, right? There are mistakes, right? There are times when the AI doesn't interpret something correctly, and there's even times when a human being will make a mistake. So they find those things too. Somebody who's a high volume customer who's kind of looking at the big picture is generally not concerned about, a mistake 1 out of 1,000 times. Right.
Completely irrelevant. Yep. It's going to happen.
We've had many customers who look at every single conversation and freak out about every single mistake. And we've determined those aren't the customers we want. We've fired them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But the rating system, so it does get used, and it's generally in the beginning when our customers are curious about, for one, they're just kind of monitoring, and whether they're skeptical or excited or whatever it is, but they're looking at it because they pay a lot of money for the leads, right? It makes sense. Because in some cases they're literally letting Verse pursue the leads alone. They're stopping their internal efforts to pursue the leads. They're doing something else with those resources. So they're in a way taking a big risk, right? And so that's why they look at the conversations. And when they see them, if they don't like the way something was handled, it's a 5-star review system. Anything that's a 3 or less essentially creates a ticket. In our world, a customer service ticket. We look and see what happened. We read what they said. See if we can address it. Maybe the problem was caused by a script that wasn't optimized properly. Maybe the problem was just a one-off mistake. Whatever it may be, it creates a ticket where we look at it, and if it's something we can address or improve or optimize, we do. It also informs the algorithms. It's like if we didn't handle something correctly, now the algorithm has seen one instance of that's bad. Don't do that again. And it's the opposite on the good side. If it's a 4 or 5-star review, there's no need to create any kind of a service ticket, but it helps us understand what is the right way to handle a situation. And on high volume customers, there's enough data where over time it can actually make a difference. So that's how we use that.
That's fascinating because, it's one of my favorite features about your platform, because if there's something that could have been done better, in my opinion, or something that went really well, right? I think feedback on everyone is good. And it's great to see that you guys are open to feedback on such, an easy way to give it too, right? It's not like you have to email someone or something. It's just right there. Boom. You can give the rating, you can give an explanation.
There's so much that can be learned, and most of the customers never really get into it, but we do. Looking at the conversations, lead source by lead source, looking at all the tiny little nuances of what's going on, language issues, verbiage. We look at all that stuff over time and, with volume over time. And over time, it has an impact on what we do and what we say and when we say it. So it is powerful.
I agree. What's one thing that excites you about Verse today? One thing that you're excited for in the future of Verse? Maybe something new you guys are trying, or something that you're doing today really well. Just one quick thing that you're thrilled about.
I'm really excited about how we're beginning to reposition the company. It has a lot to do with how we price the service, how the perception of where the value comes from. Because historically, it's kind of been, how many leads do you have? We figure out what we're going to do for you and how much do we need to charge per lead. And it's really a very narrow value conversation. And there's so much more under the hood today. The deliverability is an example of it. There are situations when, for larger customers, to be able to have the ability to quickly create campaigns that are long-term, short-term, tweak them as you're going. You guys
are flexible, which is
completely
fantastic.
Flexible. Like, we're moving towards companies who appreciate that type of flexibility. Like, they're going to appreciate that we do it right, we do it well, we do it fast. We can pretty much do whatever they want, and they'll pay for that. And they don't think of it as $2 a lead or $5 a lead.
Yeah.
We're getting a lot better at uncovering all of the value that we provide to our customers. And like I say, it's mainly with the larger ones who appreciate and can measure these things, because there's enough activity for some of these things to be material, right? Because it's about better performance, it's about cost savings, it's about operational efficiencies, it's about reducing headaches, which are kind of a softer, that whole side of the story is a little bit softer and harder to prove. But think about people who have to hire and fire a large sales team because it's a seasonal business. That goes away, right? Like with Verse, you don't necessarily have to fire your sales staff, and that's generally not what happens. What generally happens is it's a company that wants to grow, and they've got 5 people who are calling on the phone, and now they have Verse and they don't have to do that. But those 5 people we can now triple the volume of sales for the company with those same 5 people, right? So it's more about repurposing and using
accelerating.
Using technology and not just Verse, but lots of technology to let humans do what they do well and let technology do what it does well.
Well, look, I think that's the principal value proposition. I've said this to many people before. Every insurance agency that I owned or operated, I always wanted closers. I did not want hunters. I think, right, you have to play to people's skill set, people who are going to be very good salespeople. They want to talk to people who are interested in selling or buying what they're selling. They don't necessarily want to have the same thing. They don't want to be a glorified telemarketer.
Yeah,
in my
horrible.
opinion. Yeah, exactly. So now accelerating that is the principal value proposition, and be able to do it at scale, and honestly at a very, very, very inexpensive rate. I would say this, right? This is a service that you can add on to any leads that you buy from Lead Clinic. If you're a buyer of many, many, many leads, you can reach out to Verse directly to purchase your services as well. But in my opinion, accelerating any business using the proper technology is really important, and playing to people's strengths instead of having someone sitting there texting, sitting there calling, right? Automate that. Let those people close deals. They'll be happier. They'll be making more money. The business will be making more money. And right, we can automate kind of this stuff that really humans shouldn't have been doing anyways, in my opinion. So I think that's the value of your service. We're proud to partner with you. And, Paul, thanks for being here. Thanks for partnering with us. We appreciate you. And thanks for joining us on the podcast today. Thanks for listening, everyone. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you. Likewise.